Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to another session of It's Not Just Hot Air. With me today, I have Josh and I have Phoebe from the Pilot Group here for another informative podcast. How you doing, guys?
Good. So all the informative side will come from Phoebe. I'm just here to...
Yeah, you're making up the numbers, aren't you? Yeah, fantastic. Well, we were saying, actually, it's quite a few months since we've been in the studio recording, and we're in sunny Manchester.
We are indeed.
And actually, it is sunny today. It's 20 degrees, which is quite... Usually when we come up here, it's really, really quite cold.
So no heating systems will be on.
So how's business? Business is good?
It is good.
Yeah?
It's that period of the time, though, where heating isn't, I guess, in the front of mind. So it's why it's good. It's good for us to come out, do things like this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And showcase that, you know, there's still a time to be thinking about this, and now is still a valid time.
Well, I guess people aren't really sort of thinking about too much about winter and the cold, aren't they? And how much their utility bills are going to be costing them. They're actually quite enjoying the savings, I guess, right now.
Yeah.
So today's podcast, we thought it would be a really good idea to talk about frequently asked questions. And really, Phoebe, this one's directed at you. And I know you got your wingman here today as well.
Moral support.
But I guess when you go and do your site visits, when you go and see customers initially about your energy management system, you get asked a lot of the same questions. Is that true to say?
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong, they'll always throw some curveballs in there where you're a bit like, oh, okay, I've not had this one in a while. But I would say most of the questions around the tech and how we make up the savings are pretty much standard questions that they'll ask.
Yeah. Well, I've written down a few here today, and I thought it might be quite good to fill out. But also at the end, maybe some of those ones you're talking about there as well, we can talk about at the same time. So I think the first one on my list is, when is the best time of year to be looking at such a system as your EMS platform?
It's a tricky one, really. I mean,
I've stumped you. First question.
You have. Actually, I got asked this the other week on a discovery call. Probably in terms of actually doing the initial visit and the survey and actually speccing the solution ultimately to get a price and start to work on the business case. Now would be the time to start working on that, simply because we know that businesses have to go through some kind of approval stage, which does take its time. And probably by the time you've formulated that proposal and that business case and it's gone through the motions of approval, hopefully it's proved around September, August time, which means that you can implement it just before that winter period kicks in. So you can really start to reap the rewards of the savings going into that winter season with a new control system that's going to start saving straight away.
Yeah, so I guess shutting down heating, Josh, you and I were talking earlier, weren't we, about a couple of the opportunities you've got right now, and actually now or in the next sort of 3 months, would you say people ask whether now's the right time to sort of be shutting down systems just as we're sort of going into that warmer weather?
Sure. I think if we're generalising big time, we do some kind of HVAC replacements, and HVAC replacements now is the time that people look at it, as you're starting to not use them as much, whereas the EMS side of it, I don't think there's ever a wrong time for it, because we know the savings happen in the period of time where you obviously have your heating on, so during heating season, but it's never a bad time to look at something. Things always take longer than you think to get over the line, so it always gets delayed, and actually, why not now?
Yeah, it's true, because especially with what Josh was saying around the HVAC scheme, normally in the summer you're not using the heating, and if we are looking at a full replacement of a heating system, doing that installation in the summer period where we're not affecting that heating system is probably the best time to do it. And 9 times out of 10, that's what we'll see where customers will start to think that way too. But from an EMS point of view, you know, the winter is always a great time because you're going to reap the rewards straight away. But if you want it in the summer, there's always potential, if you've got a very uncontrolled system, it might be using gas still in the summer period. So there's some quick wins to be made there as well.
Good. So another question I got then, so when you're putting your system in, how long are you there? So if you've got to turn off the heating, how long are you out of circulation for? How long are you down for?
It depends on the size of the installation. If we're just talking about the control system specifically, there is no real downtime from an installation point of view. We work heater by heater.
Okay.
And probably we'd be taking about half a day per heater to do that. It's quite a non-disruptive installation from the control system perspective. When we're actually looking at a whole full HVAC installation, there might be a little bit of downtime, which is why customers tend to do that installation during the summer, because, you know, you're ripping old heaters out and putting new ones in and running new gas pipe works as well. It's a completely different installation compared to the control system installation.
So a lot more complex.
Yes, yeah.
So one of the other questions we have here is about subsidies and grants. Do you get asked that all the time? Because obviously the impacts of what your EMS system does, are they applicable for grants?
Yes, to be honest, I would say I got asked more around grants a few years ago.
Okay.
And there was a specific fund that we matched quite nicely to that, which was the European Regional Development Fund, which basically would fund up to either 25 or 50% of the project value if you hit a criteria, if you were sort of a business within a certain size and the type of technology that you were looking at. You could get a grant, but it was very specific to the region as well and what the councils and that business institute in the councils were doing. So we did a lot of that in terms of helping customers with grants that way. But I think we combat it as well, not necessarily that we offer a grant ourselves, but, you know, we can also look at flexible payment methods for customers where we can actually put something together to basically say, okay, this is your monthly payment for the system. These are your savings per month. And hopefully, if the savings are that good, you're left with a surplus at the end of it. So you've essentially paid for the system out of the savings that you're retaining on a monthly basis. And when you present that to a customer, even though they might be able to get a grant, but there's a lot of work that has to go into that, and potentially you might have to go through 3 quotes and you're actually delaying your process and the savings that you're making. We do see them leaning towards that payment plan a little bit more.
It's interesting, isn't it? And certainly in this year, we're approaching an election year. And one might say we're going to start seeing some of these things come into the political manifestos. I would imagine we will. It will be interesting to see.
Undoubtedly. Of course, it will come into it. I think as well, we probably expected to see some more after the European grant started to end.
Yes.
I believe, don't quote me, that it was promised that funding would be replaced, and I'm not sure what has been replaced with it. And I also wonder if you used to be asked it more on site because that grant was kind of around for a while, so people knew to ask about it. Whereas now, where do you start? What do you ask? Who do you go and ask? And
it's true.
Yeah.
We do work with a partner who specialises in grants, not necessarily the grants, but actually the finding of the grants, where they will take a small percentage of sort of the grant itself. But if potentially that partner's found 50% up to the project value and they're maybe taking a 5% fee, it's definitely worth looking at.
Yeah, sure.
But again, still you'd have to go through that process of potentially getting other quotes, and you may not be applicable for those grants. But
so the answer to that is ask the question.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think a great way to look at it is that on the government website there's an energy technology list, which we're on. A couple of years ago, if you were on that list and a business was looking at that technology list and buying something from that list, they were eligible to some form of tax relief. That has been taken away. So as Josh said, hopefully in the next coming months or in the next year, we'll start to see more grants come back on the scene.
Scouring those manifestos.
We will see some bits come out. We'll stay away from the politics.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I'm not. You know, we can be agnostic on that for the time being.
I think as well, I'd say always go to whatever local government kind of bodies exist. I know we've got people like the Growth Company, Green Economy in Manchester, or Green Economy work across the country, but they have insights and knowledge. They work in it day to day. They're going to be the people that know if something's out there. So as you say, always ask the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like you know where to point people, which is quite good as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. So another question I know that comes to mind is, when you're doing your installations, when you're doing your proposals, are there any other disruptions? Are there any other considerations that a business should be taking to say, while I'm doing this, I should also be looking at changing this or changing something else, and they're all does it make sense? The question is around, does it make sense while you're doing this, putting your EMS system in, does it make sense to consider other changes in the warehouse or the factory environment which will also benefit the customer?
Absolutely. I think there's 2 things to this. You know, we deal with a lot of manufacturers throughout the UK, which naturally, if they have gas that's part of that manufacturing process, when we're looking at the gas consumption data, it's not necessarily hard, but it's kind of mixed in with the heating use as well. So we do a calculation to sort of look at the summer months average, where the assumption is that they're not using heating, touch wood, and we can sort of understand what that process use is and almost take that off over the last 12 months. But it's not an accurate calculation by any stretch of the imagination. But also from a carbon reporting perspective, they should be looking at that split from the get-go, because they should be understanding in terms of what carbon emissions are I actually using on sort of operating consumption compared to process use. So we would always recommend that if we were going to put the system in, is that they'd be installing a sub-meter onto the process use equipment as well. So from the get-go, we can understand what that split is. They can also use it for the carbon reporting, but it also allows us to accurately work out what the savings are against the heating use.
Okay, interesting.
Other things as well, we'll make recommendations on a site visit, especially now that we've got a HVAC division. Nine times out of 10 when we go to a site, the heaters there are sort of 20 plus years old, where, you know, as technology's very much moved on, improved efficiency ratings are out there. I mean, we went to one customer the other day where they had sort of, I think the heaters were 22 years old. The efficiency rating of those heaters were about 70%. And compared to what's out in the market now, heaters are running at around a 95% efficiency rating.
Wow, yeah.
So even just by swapping those heaters out, they're going to get an instant saving alone. On top of that, with the control system going in at the same time, the savings would be so much greater.
Yeah.
And it's a bit more sustainable and future-proof, where you've not actually going into next winter thinking all your heaters might break.
So, Josh, your challenge is to find all those people with old heaters, I guess, from a marketing perspective.
Part of it. If they want to come straight to me.
Ideal customer profile is your heater over 20 euros.
We want them to, off these clips, they can come to me as well. That make my life so much easier. I get the flip side of that, though, as well. If someone's looking at a different renewable solution, that you could include ours at the same time. Like we spoke to Simon on the Green Shield Group, from Green Shield Group, on a previous episode.
Yeah, we did, yeah.
And they can tie into some of their projects, our system. So you could be looking at a different way to pay it back. They could tie it in with your solar. There's other ways that you can kind of include ours. So I think it's, as we've probably said on previous ones, we're one cog in the wheel. And that might mean starting with things together. It might mean starting with ours or somebody else's, which then provides you the funds to then do the next stage.
Yeah.
You know, what we say for someone, it's saved every year after that. So that money, you then know you can have set aside for whatever your next project is.
Yeah, I'm sure.
That's true.
So while you're making one change, have a shopping list for the other things you want to do as well.
Find the priorities. Find what's going to make the biggest impact for your business. It depends on what your energy goals are or your sustainability goals. But that's when, the team like Phoebe and Odessa from our side, they come to site, they can help you with that. It's not a case of we leave you to it. It's if you want some guidance in that, just come and have a conversation with us.
Interesting. The next question I always find is a great question, okay? Where does it go wrong? Look at your eyes.
Never.
Phoebe's not been prepped for these questions, by the way. She's just glared at me. Does it go wrong? Are there any challenges sometimes that you don't foresee? And what are the things to look out for? What are there any disasters?
No disasters. But
No disasters. I think possibly where it could go wrong is engagement from a client perspective with the control system. You can put the control system in. It is going to drive a saving through the automation and the control strategies that we have. But the more a client is engaged with that system from a scheduling point of view, in terms of operational hours, bank holiday periods, Christmas shutdowns, that's where you start to reap the rewards of the savings, where you see more of a saving of 35-40%. Where it potentially does go wrong, like Josh said, not a complete disaster, whereas a client relies on that automation side of things and doesn't engage from a scheduling perspective. But we are combating that in itself. We're actually just about to release a software update where we're going to alert in our calendar page when a client hasn't put a schedule into the system.
Right, okay. So it's human error is the issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Because as much as the technology is great and it can do things on its own. It does need that engagement, and it needs that attention to really keep on top of it. And what we don't want to do, not necessarily like I say, where we see it to go wrong, we start to see that engagement within the first 12 months. It teeters off after that. And really what we want to do is retain that saving that we made in that first 12 months by doing the same things again. But as things go on and people install new things and it's a shiny new toy to play with that may not be ours, that's when that engagement teeters off ever so slightly, where it does go, not, like I say, not completely wrong, but or
staff changes. If someone
Absolutely.
someone changes their job, someone new comes in, and you've got to take them through that whole process, I guess.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly that. I think staff engagement works in another way, that people always try and find a way to circumnavigate a system if it does something that they don't like or don't know. And I think if you don't engage them, at least inform them of what it's there to do and why it's important for the business. I'm sure most people at the moment can understand how important savings are on the bottom line for businesses. Just engage them, make sure they're aware of what it does, and if they're not happy with, I don't know, whatever temperature's been set, just open dialogue, have that, and you can move it a fraction. It might only be half a degree. I think we're just so set in our ways from how we set our heating at home, so we might put it straight to 20 because maybe that's what we do at home, whereas that might not be needed. It's
change. Just to elaborate a little bit more than what Josh said, I didn't think about it. We've actually had one customer where the guys on the workshop floor were sticking magnets on the bottom of the door sensors to basically override the door switch so the heating would stay on. And it's great, but a company that may have paid a good investment towards that, they've put that in for a reason, whether that's cost saving, energy savings, it's there for a reason. And we do see that ever so slightly, but it's very, very hard to keep on top of because although we have remote access into that system, we're not there to manage the people on site and how they're using it. But again, we've tried to combat that by holding behavioural change workshops. It was myself and the operations manager about 6 months ago. We went to a visit and basically did a presentation to the workshop staff who work in those areas and are dealing with that heating system on a day-to-day basis, and actually said, this is the fancy new technology, it's new, please don't poke around with it, but these are the reasons why it's being installed, and we need to see this return for this business. So interesting. So a nice segue, because we talk about costs and we talk about the management of your system, and one of the questions I have here is what's the ongoing cost of maintaining your EMS platform or system? What on average, what's it going to, because obviously recurring costs is something that's obviously going to be front and center stage in somebody's mind. It's great saving me all this money, but there is a monthly cost obviously for that, or a monitoring cost. Absolutely. And that is a very frequent question that we get. We don't hide those costs by any stretch of the imagination when we are presenting something back, although there will be an initial investment cost. What we'll do is we'll basically present 3 options that we have in terms of an annual service agreement. So we have what we class as our mandatory package, which basically is sort of a stripped down version of that, which basically includes an annual service. So we're going out and checking all the equipment, making sure it's calibrated as it was at installation. The reason why that service is in place is so that we can retain those savings year on year, not just within the first 12 months. Then we also have a hosting fee cost, because ultimately the control system is powered by a 4G router. And there is a data cost to that for us and the actual hosting of that SIM card. So that's sort of passed on to the client as well. But ultimately what we'll give that client back in terms of that mandatory package is an extended warranty period too. And they would also get access to our help desk, where we can actually remote access into the system and help them either with changes or diagnosing problems. So we're not having to actually send an engineer out to diagnose that problem. We're actually being a little bit more proactive in saying we know what that problem is, we're just going to send an engineer to fix it. And then we do have a standard package which includes all sort of what the above is, except you get an extended warranty period with the on-site response times in terms of a guaranteed response time for an engineer. And the premium package, I would say, is less of a maintenance agreement, more of a service and a software element to it, where you still get all those entitlements, but because we've got a lot of data in that system as well, which could be really, really fruitful in terms of helping you understand if there's any other energy saving opportunities, we will actually do that for them. So it's basically quarterly data insights. So they give us the parameters, we'll build the report for them and extract the data. And then we will also be a little bit more proactive from a monitoring point of view in terms of if there's any kind of faults on the systems. Rather than the customer having to check the alerts, we'll actually go into the system, check the alerts for them, and either give them a call or an email and basically say, actually, I think we may need to come out to site. So it's, you know, as a site manager, they've got a lot of other things to deal with and they might not be checking it on a daily basis. So we'll do that for them. But sort of typical costs, probably the mandatory range from about £700 to maybe £1,200, depending on the system size. And then sort of the standard would be from anything from £1,200 to maybe £2,000, again, dependent upon the system size. Whereas the premium package is a little bit more, I would say, where it probably ranges from around £3,000 to £4,000.
Oh, well, if you're telling people, you know, there's a possibility of saving up to 43%, it's still worth it. And I guess what I got from what you said there, Phoebe, I guess if they allow you to look after them, you'll continue to, the system will work well, they'll get the extended warranty. So it's sort of a win-win scenario, really.
Absolutely. And it's all about that retained saving after the first 12 months. And, you know, every client that we'll deal with will be assigned an account manager. So even though we've made probably a great saving within the first 12 months, actually with that data insight piece, what can we do to actually improve that saving in the second year? Not just to retain it. Is there anything else from a recommendation or a configuration point of view, or actually looking at the data that we can actually make an additional saving in year 2 or year 3?
Yeah, it's like a customer success type sort of relationship, isn't it? Making sure
Massively. I think we're moving more and more towards a kind of energy management as a service way. You know, if we can have this information, if we can work alongside you, it's that collaborative kind of relationship that we can actually begin to start save even more.
Yeah, and that's where the partner piece comes in, because the idea is that we've understood that business within the first 12 months, really got to know the client, their operation, their site, what they're trying to achieve from a carbon and a cost perspective, but also built a really, really good relationship with that client where they've got a confidence in us, where they don't really want to go to anywhere else in terms of what their carbon journey looks like. And then that's when we'll start to recommend the partners that we work with.
Yeah, as I say, if they got the shopping list of the other things they should do, then get into the mindset of that, which is great. One of the other questions I've got here, and we're almost done, you'll be pleased to know, is around alternative gas. I mean, there's been a lot of hype around green gas, and that becoming more and more prevalent. Do you get asked lots of questions about that? Is there alternative biofuels or fuels that can be used actually in your system, or is that something that is commonly scoped out and said, look, I've heard this, is it true, sort of thing?
Yeah, there's two to that, I would say. We normally get that question asked if we've got a client that's running on oil rather than gas, because they just may not have a gas supply to the site because of the location of where they are. And I think it's either red diesel or old heating oil, where it's naturally being phased out from a legislation perspective. So from a HVAC perspective, they will have to look at alternative fuels, something that is a little bit cleaner. But in terms of the actual heating system itself, it could stay the same. It's just dependent upon the compatibility of that equipment and the tanks that they have on site too.
Okay.
So that is something that we do get asked, and there are alternatives out there. Still, I would say, it is cleaner, don't get me wrong, and it's cheaper to run because the government aren't penalising the client for using that fuel. And I would say that's probably LPG or kerosene.
Right.
But from a gas perspective, we get asked a lot around what other technologies are out there.
What's coming,
yeah. And it's more around electrifying in that respect. It goes back to probably an earlier podcast that we've done.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Where those questions do get asked. But the types of buildings that those clients are in and the technology that's out on the market right now is just not quite where it needs to be, unless you've got a client that's going to really invest a heavy budget in terms of actually upgrading the building completely from an insulation perspective, a roof perspective, and then actually looking at electrifying. And then there's other things to consider in terms of what's the load like at the site at this moment in time from a capacity perspective, and what's the annual spend going to look like overall as well.
Yeah, really interesting. Well, what have I missed? Because, I mean, obviously I've taken you through a list of questions there and really comprehensive answers. Thank you. But is there anything else you're getting asked on a regular basis that maybe I've missed out on?
Yeah, I mean, what I get asked a lot, which goes back to the control system and the business case that we put forward, obviously we guarantee a saving, which is a bold statement to make. They want to understand what the T's and C's are behind that guarantee, which we put in the proposal anyway. We're quite transparent in terms of what a client would have to stick to in terms of how they can actually, if we don't achieve that saving, if they follow those things, then they will get a payout. But the question that I get asked quite a lot is has there been any occasion where you haven't hit that guaranteed saving?
Yeah.
And I would say to that, yes, there have been instances where we've not hit that guaranteed saving, but there's normally some circumstances around that as to why we've not hit that guaranteed saving. Whether they've changed in terms of operational hours, whether they've changed temperatures on site. Again, it goes back to those staff changes as well. If you've installed a system 6 months in and they've had a change in site manager and actually think, oh God, it's a bit cold in here, let's boost it all up to 20 degrees rather than 16 degrees. Your savings are going to be much less in that respect.
Double the heaters, often the one.
Yes, another one in terms of doubling the heaters is another one. But it proved with Music Magpie, where even though we'd doubled the kilowatt, well, we'd not doubled it, but they'd increased by 90 kilowatts, I think, we were still able to prove a saving of around 27%.
Which is great.
Which it would have been a lot more, probably, had they've not increased, but they needed it there. They needed to heat the people. So, that's probably the question that I get asked quite a lot.
Interesting. It's a marketing man's dream, that, isn't it? We're gonna guarantee you a saving.
Yeah.
you say it sometimes. It's like a double-edged sword, though. Like it really is, because I feel like it's such a bold claim that sometimes people don't believe it. And I think if I was on the other end, maybe I'd think the same. So it's up to us to get our message across and educate in the right way.
And it's good to talk about this in a real life scenario and a real life situation, putting people talking about this as opposed to just putting it on a website or a piece of paper.
Stuff comes to life, and even like the examples Phoebe's given, we've had to, work with people on bits, and we don't shy away from anything. So it's ask us any questions, ask us about how we do it, and we're really open with it. If you look at all our materials, stuff that we've been making, it shows you how we do it and the key features that deliver that. And that's just what's built into the system. Yeah,
really interesting. Well, guys, we're going to have to wrap that up for today. But thank you very much for your answers. Phoebe, you've been great as ever. Thank you. Josh, thanks for being the wingman. And we'll see everybody again next time on It's Not Just Hot Air.